Hi, Matt. How are you?
Angela, I am good. Thanks so much for having me here.
Jumping in.
Mhm.
What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of philanthropy in the arts?
There's a lot of things that come to mind. I think of my experience with and the contrast between raising money in the arts versus raising money in the engineering college I worked at before that. And it was fascinating because the people, the engineers and artists, were actually very similar. They had their heads into what they were doing, they were totally focused, but they also had limited communication skills, at least verbally, or at least interpersonal interactions. I kind of got used to that with engineers, and I found that among a lot of the artists I met. Yet the engineers kind of came with the presumption that I didn't know what I was looking at. But the artists, it was totally opposite. They were almost offended that I didn't know that they were in the ABC school of the XYZ genre of whatever kind of work they were doing. Maybe it's just because I was used to people who sometimes had a hard time communicating what they were doing. A lot of engineering is art in some respects. I mean, you're being creative. You're building something that somebody else hadn't seen before, except maybe it's more 3D art for some kinds of engineering, or maybe it's, they say code is art, right, for the computer folks. I read that Norman Rockwell was very, very frustrated that many people didn't take him seriously as an artist. You're just an illustrator. I mean, his stuff is amazing, right? And yet, I think having a tolerance and empathy for that person who is coming in without experience in your work really can go a long way and really bring people into what you do. Because in effect, what you're doing is you're making them your volunteers to go now translate what you're doing to other people, to their friends, to the people who they interact with, who can appreciate what you're doing and the creativity in it.
There's a lot of labeling that's going on here, is the
Oh, yeah.
sense that I'm getting. Either you have the badge of I'm an artist, or you shy away from talking about or identifying as an artist. How do we combat that? Or what are your experiences in that labeling in the creative arts sector versus other sectors?
You see that all the time. My daughter has a degree in art history and she now works in art therapy. And yet when somebody hears that, they automatically relegate you off. It's too bad. I don't know that we can fight it head on. I think it's something that over time as a culture we have to come to appreciate and to show time and again, just keep on showing those examples of how being an artist is something that actually is accomplishment rather than something that's superfluous around the edges of what we do.
Maybe our efforts as a creative sector should not be in convincing or explaining the tangible benefits or the transferable skills that the arts provide, but rather channel our energy into running for public office so we have a seat at the table and then we can influence from the inside out.
I hear a lot of things these days about hard power, soft power, right? And how we as a people and as our government expresses itself around the world. And engineer is hard. People see it as it's something that is tangible in that they can hold it and they can hit it, right? And they can break it. But also it is difficult. And I think it's that appreciation of the difficulty of the arts, I think, which is really lacking. Folks see something on a wall or theater and they kind of say, oh, I can do that. Well, no, you really can't, but they don't appreciate that, that's as hard as designing an engine and coming up with a new widget for something that's going to change the world that way.
Too often we show the performance or the finished product that's been refined and honed over thousands of hours, and we
Hmm.
don't show the process
Yeah.
where failure happens and that we have to repeat over and over and over technique to get to that aesthetically beautiful end product.
Honestly, it's the same thing as an athletic team. You see the game day and what they're doing. You don't see all the hundreds of hours. Baseball has done really well with that because of spring training. You do see the hours they put in and the way people are practicing to get into that. And it's really helped them.
Well, Netflix or whatever series that they now do where they're showing NFL summer camps. You're following this team through their spring training. They're getting ready for their season. There's more connectability. I'm more apt to want to turn on a game on Sunday afternoon and
Yeah.
watch because I understand the hard work more clearly that goes through. And why don't we do that for symphonies or orchestras or
Mhm.
other performing arts, where we're showing the skill that it takes and really the competition that's on the line? There's so many it's ironies, I think. So here we are, the creative sector, right? We are the most creative, arguably, of any industry, but yet we have such a hard time thinking in creative ways of how do we get across the complexities of the work that we do. So to get back into this whole notion of labeling and
Mm,
measuring success, I often hear about how university will measure success based on the number of people that graduate and go on into their field after
yes.
graduation.
Right.
Just because we major or graduate in the arts or arts management and we go into, let's say we're working for a major bank or we're
Mhm.
doing something that's not in the field, why isn't that viewed as highly successful? Because you're able to take the skills that you learned as an undergrad and apply them to anything when you graduate.
You're totally right. I think part of that is the pressure that people see as in higher ed to become effectively a trade school. The whole basis of a liberal arts education was that it's going to prepare you for anything versus graduating with a nursing degree, highly valuable, but is really preparing you to become a nurse, a specific job. And unfortunately, we underappreciate what general knowledge, what broad education is going to bring somebody because folks are saying, oh, I'm sending my child, it's a significant investment, to a school. I want them to do whatever it is that you've educated them for. It doesn't work that way. In fact, it rarely works that way.
I was speaking a while back to a president of a liberal arts university, and he said that nowadays students major in job titles.
Yes.
They don't major in degrees. And I thought that that was so interesting. Then why are we missing the mark when employers say we are lacking critical thinking skills, creativity skills in the workplace?
That gets it. There's a whole disconnect there that I've seen for years that happens between the HR people and the top of the organization, where I have literally been in the forums where I've seen CEOs say, I want creative people. I think liberal arts are great. And yet their HR people are looking for specific skills that they can put out a widget with. It's whether that's corporate speak, I think there's some of that going on, but also there's just a plain disconnect of what, because they have gotten those critical thinking skills and maybe at a different time. I bring this back to the arts. I think that people don't know quite where to put that. There aren't like art companies,
Right.
right? Or if there are, artists don't want to work in art companies.
We've put ourselves in a box, and I wonder how much of a disservice have we done as the arts. We're like so siloed, but our sector, I argue, transcends every other industry because of that creative notion that you can't be innovative if you're not creative.
You bring up something interesting, and it makes me think about philanthropy because there is this idea that the money has to be pure. That if I get it from a government source, then it's unbiased. Maybe not
Mm.
today. Well, that's a good discussion to have. And if I get it from a private donor, then I have to be beholden to the private donor
See,
so much.
well, for me, and if you're a patron of a specific organization or discipline, it's because you appreciate or are drawn to that. And so I
Yes.
feel like you're either going to be philanthropic to that organization because you believe in the work that they're doing, or you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, that is what good fundraising and good nonprofit management tells us, right? Professor Matt here, all fundraising is CIA, right? It's capacity, interest, access. People have to have capacity for what you're asking. They have to have interest in what you're doing, and you have to have access to them in a way that they might make a gift, whether that's an address or a personal connection or social media or whatever it is, right? But access and capacity mean nothing if they don't have interest. You have to have interest first. And that's huge.
I want to go down this road deeper. So, talk to me about your experience in fundraising. That's a huge concern. When I talk to leaders in the arts, the number one concern is funding. Tell me a little bit on your trajectory on what has changed. Has anything changed? And what what should we be doing now so 2 to 4 to 6 years from now, we can have more sustainability and capacity building?
Yeah, it's all about relationships. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. You want to have personal walk up to somebody, shake their hand, say, "Hey, how you doing, Bob?" kind of relationships, right? But relationships are built through paper. Yes, paper direct mail, right? It's still very effective. It's not just for old people. Paper supports email, supports social media, supports phone calls, right? But the whole thing is to build relationships and so that people see that you are the go-to place for whatever it is you represent. And typically that's going to be something around geography and whatever the specialty is you do. I will tell you a great thing, anybody raising money, particularly arts organizations, I would make an avatar of the typical person that you are looking for as a funder and draw it. Have somebody dress up, hire an actor, whatever it is, right? You want people to be able to see it. It's a brain science thing that, people know, for example, what kind of car they drive, and they see more of that car around them than any other kind of car. And they never made that many of that, whatever car that is. The point is you've defined that and now you see more of it. So if you define your typical donor who you want to get money from, you will see more of that person.
Okay, so that's a business strategy as well. That's like a brand building strategy, right?
Yeah,
You need to
totally.
know, well, it's who's your customer
Yeah.
and where
Target
do they
marketing.
live and where do they get their information and how do they
Mhm.
like to be interacted and all of that. So we're not doing that in the arts, in fundraising. Are we just like throwing spaghetti at the wall?
Yeah, yeah. I think not only in the arts but in nonprofits generally, people really back off from data, and that's what this is collecting data. They like to connect with people, and that's a really good thing. But when you start putting it into databases, when you start using now AI and other things to kind of leverage this so that you know who you're talking to and you can build relationships better, you lose some folks, and we can't. Yeah.
So let's take this data measurement and getting funding from elected officials.
Hmm.
I can tell stories. I can talk about how the arts uplift, how, we're resilient and all of these things. And it's so what? Now, when there are so many pressing issues out there, there's a lot of this, okay, great. Yes, we know that, but we don't have the hard data that goes with it. So forever, I've been searching for where's the data that we can show the return on art, just like in any other business, we want a return on investment. That what are those hard numbers that we have?
What you say kind of triggers something in my head. It's people buy emotionally, justify logically. So what the arts has at some level or another tried the emotional part and bringing people in, and that's good. But like you say, it's missing the justifying logically. It's going back to buying a car, right? Love that little red sports car. It gets great gas mileage. We can park it in a small space, all those logical things, right? And you need to bring logic to this outside the emotion so that now you can say, we have those numbers to back that up.
I'm hearing colleagues in my head saying, "Well, we have data, Angela. We're up to our
Mm,
eyeballs in data. Economic impact. That's what you hear all the time from these foundations or service organizations talking about. That's not making a difference. If it did, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in, constantly wondering when the rug is going to be pulled out from under us from a public funding standpoint."
yeah. Well, I think a lot of that, though, is outputs, not outcomes. And that's, the inputs, outputs, outcomes. And we need to focus more on the outcomes
Can
of
you talk a
where
little
that's
bit
going.
about that?
Yeah, basically how's it changing people's lives, right? I mean, you can say you put X number of dollars into a system, that's an input. They buy X number of products, that's an output. But now what is that product doing to make how has it brought something better to their life? It's easy with food. You can say, okay, now these people are able to do these other things because, like, you think of kids getting a well-fed kid learns better, right? Well, so now they got a meal in front of them. That's the output. And the outcome is that they're getting better grades and that they're getting a better life.
And those programs are being supported and funded because they have data to
Hmm.
show that you input and the output and the outcome is all there. That's what we're
Yeah.
lacking in the arts. We focus on outputs, but what really matters is what happens to the many that
Well,
attend or participate.
I would recommend to any arts organization is develop a story bank. Start collecting stories from people who have had an impact from what you do and can express it in the kind of terms we're talking about here. How did that impact their lives? And then you can go back and effectively figure out the data that's going to support that.
I call it the 1-2 punch. I say that data drives and
Hmm.
stories stick.
Yeah.
So we need to go in with the data, but follow up with a story that is compatible to the data that you're presenting. So it's a proof of effect or outcome.
Humans are all about stories, right? That's how we learn, through stories. And so art is all about stories so many times. We need to connect those two together, right? The impact, what's the story you're telling and what's the impact of that story?
Well, it gets back to what you said at the beginning. There are a lot in this sector that expect you to understand the
Mhm.
work and what it is or the complexity around it, rather than taking the approach of expect that no one understands what this is.
I think there's some cultural background to that too. I think artists are probably more used to being defensive than a lot of people, where an engineer may not have that issue, that having to justify it all the time and all that. And so at some level they say either I don't care to explain this to you, or why aren't you coming in? They put up a bit of a barrier there.
Where does that begin? And how can we start shifting that
Yeah.
behavior?
A lot of it comes through education, through being able to encourage folks to tell their stories, their personal stories, as well as the stories behind their art. I think there is some of that, but amplifying it might be a way of getting to that. Starting to collect, like I said, story banks, impact stories. And the reason, by the way, for a story bank is that the whole idea is that you want to have at your fingertips for grant proposals, for publications, for speaking engagements, things that you can talk about whatever art is that your organization is doing.
Put your nonprofit hat on as we're winding down the conversation. There's uncertainty in the air on support, funding, capabilities. What advice do you have to nonprofits on what should they be focusing on, but also keeping an eye out for?
I think what they need to be keeping an eye out for, and I guess, my nonprofit hat is largely my fundraising hat, right? Which is getting out and marketing and telling it what you are all about to the people who care about it, and kind of building that audience broadly. The first thing that a lot of organizations will cut when they see they have funding issues is marketing. And I think that's a huge mistake, because marketing and fundraising kind of comes out of marketing. That's your lifeboat. That's where people need to understand what you're doing so that you can tell your story and get them to fund it. Clearly, government funding of the arts has become problematic, suggested it has been for years. And I think, yeah, there's a lot behind that. It's time to get the public to pitch in and see the value of this for everybody. You want folks to feel a loss if your organization and as artists were to go away.
That's something that I often tell clients. Why is it important what you do? And
Hmm.
why do you do what you do?
Yep.
And what would be missing
Yeah.
if you went away?
Yep.
What would the
Yep.
community be missing? And
Right.
that's what you focus on, how you communicate those stories.
Well, and that gets back to something else that I made up for my classes, which is 1-to-1 for one. I say, people are like, well, I feel like I'm begging, I'm out there, no, 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 it's not about you. You are bringing the resources in terms of the programs and the things you do. The funder is bringing the revenue to be able to make those resources come alive, but you're not doing it for you. You are doing it for the people you serve. That one. So it's 1-to-1, me to the funder for the one that we're serving. And whether that's a person in the public, whether that's a student, whether, whoever that is, identify that person. And that makes a huge difference.
That is such a great way to end the conversation, Matt. So insightful, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.